It's time for Comeback Sports with Brandon, the Coach Perry, and Pat, the shot caller Flaherty. Here we go.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Comeback Sports. That's right, we're the weekly sports talk show. We bring you 10 sports topics that are going on across the country, across the globe, and we go over those sports topics one at a time. A lot of good stuff. Once again, this week, I am your host, Pat, the shot caller Flaherty. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Brandon, the Coach Perry. Brandon, what's going on, buddy?
Coming from the coach's corner over here outside of Boston, doing pretty good, man. A lot of sports topics popping up. I mean, we could have had 20 topics this week, so I'm really excited to dive into the 10 that we chose, though.
Yeah, no question. A lot of good sports topics happening, across the globe. But, with football season coming up, college football already happening last weekend. Yep. And, of course, baseball's kind of winding down less than a month ago in the regular season. So a lot to talk about. But, folks, before we get going on our topics, remember, if you like what you see and you like what you hear on Comeback Sports tonight, you're probably watching us on YouTube. Make sure you give us a subscribe on YouTube. So go to Comeback Sports, subscribe. All our content, all our videos that are cut up by our awesome producer, Ben Kudo, they're going to be filtered to that YouTube channel that you subscribe to, so make sure you do that. Also, we have a call-in number at the top of the screen right there. I'm sure you can see it right now. If you want to call into the show, if you got anything you want to talk about on the show, if you want to just give us a comment on how we're doing hosting the show, any type of stuff like that, if you want to disagree with us on the show, call that number live during the show. We'll be sure to answer your question as best we can. And then also, you can follow us on Twitter right there. Our handles are at the bottom of the screen, so make sure you check that out as well. A lot of good stuff up on our Twitter handles for both Brandon and myself. We're going to kick things off with baseball here on topic number one. And first off, it's the Boston Red Sox. Red Sox running amok. I was actually at the game on Labor Day on Monday and seeing what happened where the Red Sox were up 7-1 with Chris Sale on the mound. They end up losing this game with a bunch of errors and a bunch of runs given up in the middle of the game. Brennan, it was brutal. Red Sox not looking pretty right now.
Yeah, I mean, that really was not good. I mean, especially that game. I think what it says right there, embarrassment at Fenway is pretty correct. And it's like, I was talking to a couple of my family members, and we were talking about how they had 4 errors in the game. And we were talking about, and maybe you can even correct me on this because I'm not a big baseball guy, but I was saying, pretty much for every error is almost a guaranteed run in professional baseball at this point. So it's like 4 errors or, 4 runs given up right there automatically just on their own unforced mistakes. So it's just really one of those things where you can't have that and expect to win the game, especially in professional baseball. And I think, on average, you generally just see maybe 1 error a game across most, baseball games. So to have 4 from one team, that's kind of a big deal. And it really cost them in that game and obviously cost them the win. And then it was a shock also because we had, our ace on the mound, Chris Sale out there and to have him, I don't know, I kind of want to say didn't get enough support, really, realistically, didn't get enough support from the defense and didn't get enough support from the bats as well. And then I was even saying, to be honest, for both teams, it was kind of an embarrassment. If you look at the score, it was 11-10. Is that correct? Right?
Yeah.
So I'm an 11-10 game in baseball. There's not really much good to talk about for both teams, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this game, and the biggest thing for the Red Sox too is they, this was at the point where, the Red Sox have slowly but surely every single day last week where we're hearing guys from the Red Sox that have to sit out because of COVID, a positive COVID test, and it's sort of caught up to them over the weekend. You see this game on Labor Day, where, Kike Hernandez has been out for a while, so he's not in center. You got Verdugo in center, who's a decent fielder. He's not a bad center fielder. I think I'd rather have him in left, but, he lost one of the biggest plays of the game was him losing a ball in the sun. You don't have your top middle infielders in there because Bogarts is out, Brandon Arroyo's out, second baseman, so you're playing with backup shortstops and second basemen who are either call-ups or random guys that they've picked up, or they even went out and got Jose Iglesias, who was in the Red Sox organization a few years ago before he was traded to Detroit. So to kind of shore up the defense a little bit. So you're missing all these guys, and it really hurt them defensively. Offensively, not quite as much. They had some guys who did come in and hit, and Hunter Renfro's been tearing the cover off the ball. JD Martinez, has been consistent somewhat. But, not having that defense there. Chris Sale wasn't, as sharp as he's been since he's come back from his injury in this particular start. So he really needed the defense to kind of pick him up a little bit, and they did not do that. And then they made things worse by making a couple more errors throughout the game. So, defense does matter in baseball. I mean, we think that it's just pitching and bats, but defense does matter too. Anytime you watch one of the World Series teams, one of the Red Sox teams that won the World Series, you'll see that they played really good defense, whether it was having a really good defensive first baseman, the middle infield. They always seem to have a good defensive outfield the years that they win the World Series, because it's so tough to defend, right field. That's always a really tough area. That's why a guy like Mookie Betts was out there, because you almost have a center fielder playing right field because it's such a vast area out there in Fenway Park. So, the defense was sorely lacking at Fenway the other night, and that's what happened. And then they lost again on Tuesday, 12-7 to Tampa Bay. I mean, the Red Sox scored 6 runs late in the game, so they were already down by a ton. And it's like, they're dealing with a lot, and they might still make the playoffs. They might get that second wild card spot, and then who knows what can happen after that. But this just doesn't seem like a team that's going to make any kind of postseason run if they do, in fact, get in there. They have games with Seattle. They have games with the Yankees. They have games with, I think they have a couple more with Tampa Bay. So they have some games coming up that are going to be somewhat tough games against teams that are either fighting for the playoffs or going towards the playoffs. They have a few against Baltimore, but they're not out of the woods yet. They still have some more games to play where they need to finish out the season strong, and they're not looking like that right now.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct there, where they've got to make a push here down the stretch if they're looking to make it into the playoffs. And I will say the good thing for them is the Yankees have been on a slight downfall over these last few games, losing a few games here in a row as well, to maybe come back a little bit down to earth, because they've been, the hottest team in baseball, I'd say, after the break. So that's good that they're coming back a little bit down to earth and have lost a few games, and that helps the Sox out. But I mean, honestly, if you're any team in any sport, you don't want to leave it to your opponent to get you into the playoffs. You want to take control of your own destiny. So they're going to have to do that and win some games here down the stretch. But I think the COVID effect definitely has to come into play right now, where, the coach was just talking about recently how Kike Hernandez was hit pretty hard by COVID, and it was taking him a long time to recover. And they're saying now Arroyo is kind of showing a lot of symptoms and is kind of symptomatic as well. So it's really one of those things where we've talked about it, that COVID is going to be affecting pretty much every professional sport across the globe for the foreseeable future. And it's something that they're going to have to adapt with. But, it's definitely a bad time, especially for the Boston Red Sox, to have to be dealing with those issues when you're trying to win some games down the stretch. But hopefully they'll get it done. We'll definitely be rooting for them, and we'll be rooting against the Yankees. That's for dang sure. But let's move on to topic number 2. And we were just talking about COVID, so let's continue that conversation. And that's going into the NFL now, where we were just talking about it. Every professional league is going to have to be dealing with this. And right now, some NFL teams are already dealing with it without the season even starting. We're talking about, just coming out of preseason camp and now getting ready for the first week. And teams are already dealing with COVID issues, mainly the Miami Dolphins right now.
Yeah, so it just came out that I think it was a day or two ago that Austin Jackson, the starting left tackle for Miami, tested positive for COVID. And then Adam Shaheen, who is, I believe, a reserve tight end for the Dolphins, he also tested positive for COVID. They know Shaheen, he's been kind of anti-vax this whole offseason, so he's going to be out for 10 days. We know he's not vaccinated. Jackson, we're not sure what the vaccination status is. So depending on what that is, if he gets 2 negative COVID tests in the next 24 hours, I think he can go back on the field, over the next couple of days, depending on how quickly that turnaround is, if he is vaccinated. If he's not vaccinated, he's missing the Pats game, and possibly he might not make this week 2 game, depending on when exactly he tested positive. So just a tough situation for Miami. I mean, guys need to get vaccinated. I think that's been our stance this whole time. But This is going to be a reality of a lot of these teams. And, it's tough that these teams have to deal with this. You don't know which guys you're going to have each week. We sort of had some of this last year. You wonder if now guys are sort of letting their guard down and they're not, following the protocols as strictly as they did last year. But this is going to continue to happen throughout the NFL season. How much it'll happen, who knows? But it's going to happen again to some of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, I know I most recently seen, I believe it was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that said they were 100% fully vaccinated. So if we can see more teams getting to that 100% fully vaccinated mark, that'll help, especially their teams. They're not going to have to worry about forfeiting a game, and it's really putting it in their opponents' hands that they might be the ones that have to forfeit at this point. So if I'm a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or also the Atlanta Falcons that also reached that 100% mark, I'm feeling good going into this season right now. And because my team's vaccinated, my coaches are vaccinated, everyone around my team's vaccinated, that we're going to have the best chance of getting through our season with minimal interruptions. And I think in a world right now with COVID, that is an advantage at this point right now, because you might not have to be missing players or coaches or anything at this point. You could roll through your normal week and be preparing like normal, where a team like the Miami Dolphins at this point are pulling players aside to get tested and isolating players and having players test positive. So it's just something that's certainly not helping them going into game week against the New England Patriots, one of their biggest foes in a league rival. And they're having to deal with COVID issues on top of, getting prepared for a Bill Belichick team. So it's just really one of those things where, like you said, we've been fully, vocal on this show about being vaccinated and getting vaccinated. And I just think it's, one of these things where some of these players have to wake up and if they want to be a team player, not only for the NFL and for their teammates in the NFL, but how about for the world and for the country, be a team player, get vaccinated. Let's get out of this pandemic. Because right now it just seems like a lot of people are just being like, hey, we're going to accept the virus and kind of roll with the repercussions. But that's just kind of an idiotic way of thinking, in my opinion. And I don't know. Some of these leagues, I think, are doing the right thing, though, with stepping up and saying, hey, you're going to get vaccinated. Or in the NFL's case, if you have to miss a game, you're not going to get your game check. Or in college football, they're now saying, if a team has to forfeit a game, then they're not going to redo it. It's just going to be a flat out forfeit in an L. So it's just really one of those things where I think a lot of players have to wake up here and get vaccinated and get on board with this train that's rolling on to get us out of this pandemic.
Yeah, no question. I mean, you just look at this particular week, too, for the Dolphins. If Jackson doesn't play, he's the starting left tackle. I guess he wasn't having a great camp, but you're playing against the Patriots team who just completely retooled their front seven and now has a Matt Judon. Now has a guy like Josh Uche on the other edge, who's an emerging second-year player who can rush the passer. You now have a couple of guys in the middle in Godshaw, and you have Dante Hightower, who's going to be blitzing, and Kyle Van Noy, and now Chase Winovich. They can just use him as a third down rusher, and it's like you're facing a team that might have a really good pass rush this year. Now you're losing your starting left tackle, and they might have to shift over Liam Eichenberg, who was a second-round tackle taken out of Notre Dame for them, who's a really good player, but they expected him to play at guard. They might now have to shift him to left tackle, and he's a rookie, so he's going to be going up against a Judon or somebody like that. So it's a sticky situation for the Dolphins in Week 1. I hope this doesn't last more than 1 week. But that's the other thing, too. You get vaccinated, you can show up the day of the game and test positive, but at worst case scenario, you're just not going to play in that particular game. Then the next week you're going to be fine because you're vaccinated. You only need a negative test, like we said, within 24 hours, a couple of negative tests. So that's that worst case scenario for a vaccinated player as opposed to an unvaccinated player who, like the Shaheen, who might have to sit out 10 days. So it's going to be a story going forward. We're going to stick with the NFL here for topic number 3, and that's Tyrod is Texans QB1. Tyrod Taylor has been named the starter for the Houston Texans, even though Deshaun Watson is healthy and could play if everything was on the up and up, I guess, if you want to call it that in Houston. But things are not quite the case there with everything going on with Deshaun Watson. Brandon, what do you think about Tyrod Taylor being named the starter in Week 1?
Well, let's not beat around the bush. Deshaun Watson just does not want to play for the Texans.
Yeah.
He's come out and he said that. He's been vocal about it over this last year. It feels like that we've been talking about it, that he wants to get traded to a team. And it seems like the Texans are just not making enough status or headway on finding the correct team. There were some talks, obviously, recently about the Philadelphia Eagles being interested. And I think that obviously that story's gone now because they went ahead and traded for Gardner Minshew. And it might not be a thing that they might say for the right price, we still might get involved in that Deshaun Watson trade. But I think when they traded for Gardner Minshew, to me, that was a sign that they were saying, all right, you don't want to deal with us at this point. So we're going to go on and we're going to move on to our plan B. We're going to get another quarterback in here. And we're just going to move on. So it's now, I think they're back to the drawing board of saying, who are we going to trade him to? Are we going to trade him to the Miami Dolphins? Are the Miami Dolphins still interested? Is a team like maybe the New England Patriots interested? I'm just throwing that out there because I would love him to get traded. Obviously, they're rolling with Mac Jones. But it's just like I'm saying, there's got to be a team that is still interested here in a quarterback that is in his prime, is playing the best he's ever played. Last year, he had really a ragtag wide receiver core, and he threw for a career best in yardage. So it's just really one of those things where you've still got really one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL out there and as trade bait, and some team's going to want him. It's just when are they going to want him? And at this point, obviously for the Texans, the longer it goes, the worse it goes for them because now you're having to obviously play your backup quarterback. Let's just be real. Tyrod Taylor was once a starting quarterback in this league, but for many of years has been a backup quarterback, and I think that's more of a role that suits him at this point in his career. But he's going to get the time to lead the charge here and lead the team, and rightfully so when your QB number 2 and QB number 1 doesn't want to play at all. So it's he's going to step up. He's going to be the leader of this team, and he's going to try to do the best that he can and try to win football games. So my hat's off to Tyrod for doing that. But it's the real question is, when is Deshaun Watson going to be traded? Who is he going to be traded to? And it's like, man, like I said, the longer it goes, I just think the less leverage the Houston Texans have, especially now when other teams are looking, saying, man, did you see that? They just had to name Tyrod their starter because Deshaun doesn't want to take the field at all. So it's just really one of those things where this guy, he has said it many of times, he wants to play for another team. I know there's some baggage with him right now with all these accusations, so I'm not going to dodge those. And I'm not going to pretend like they don't exist. But it's just really one of those things where I've even said it on this show many a times, the longer that goes on as well with the accusations, it makes it seem like they're not true because you're not hearing any evidence coming forward that is actually implicating Deshaun Watson in any of those accusations. So if I'm an NFL team, I'm saying, hey, Houston Texans, what can we do? What's it going to take so we can pull this trade? And it's just going to be a good thing for both teams once a trade does go down.
Yeah, you mentioned that the Texans don't have any leverage in the situation. I actually think Deshaun Watson doesn't have any leverage in this situation because what's going on right now is if he didn't have the sexual assault allegations, I think he would have been traded already. I think we all kind of could maybe even agree upon that. I think there would have been a suitor, whether it was Miami or maybe it would have been Denver after they didn't get a quarterback in the draft, but they seem to have every other piece to their team, and they were out of the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes as well. Who knows if the Rams would have thought about taking. I can't remember I think when they traded for Stafford, that was before the allegations, so they might have been out of the question there. But even the Redskins or something like that. I mean, there were suitors, and now there aren't. One, because of the sexual assault allegations. Some teams are just not going to trade a bunch of assets for Deshaun Watson, who's got those sexual assault allegations. And then, like you mentioned, number 2. Now that the season has started, essentially, first game's in a couple of days, that's going to shrink the amount of teams that are going to want to bring him in even more because now you're going to bring him in essentially mid-season. So, I think what's going to have to happen if they are going to trade him mid-season is some team that's in the hunt or is close to a playoff hunt is going to, has an injury to their starting quarterback. So like I mentioned, a team like Denver, who, has Teddy Bridgewater. They don't seem to like Drew Lock. I don't think he's their long-term starter. So, a couple of weeks through the season, say Bridgewater gets hurt. I hope he doesn't. Big fan of Teddy Bridgewater. But if he gets hurt, they have all these weapons. They have a good defense. They could be a team that could trade for Deshaun Watson. The other thing, too, is the Texans, they're not going to they won't say this publicly, they're not a playoff team. You know, they're one of the worst teams in the NFL right now. They don't have enough talent to be a playoff contender. You mentioned last year, Deshaun Watson was unbelievable last year, and there was a lack of talent on this team. There's less talent on the Texans now than there was last year. You know, because you think J.J. Watt left, and they don't have the same guys on defense. And you didn't really, you know, you have Brandon Cooks at receiver. That's probably one of your few weapons that you can really count on. You know, David Johnson's one of your other guys, I guess. They don't really have a team to contend. So if you're not in any hurry for Watson really to get back, if nobody wants to trade for him, they're not going to trade him for, you know, a bag of footballs either. So, you know, Watson's the one that kind of is losing leverage in this situation. So if they get to a point this year where, you know, it doesn't seem like anybody's going to trade for Watson, if I'm his agent, I say, you might just have to play, you know, and then, because you don't want to sit the whole season out, because then how are you going to get, you know, to another team next year? You're still under contract, and now teams haven't seen you for a year. So it's a very complex situation, both the team and the quarterback, and you know, we'll see what happens, but Watson's losing leverage too.
I've got to disagree, and just like I disagree with producer Ben occasionally, me and producer Ben disagree a lot more. It's fun. Producer Ben, the man behind the scenes, the man behind the curtains. Give that man a follow on Twitter as well. Ben at Comeback Sports on Twitter. He tweets out a lot of great stuff as well and retweets a lot of good stuff. But yeah, no, I've got to disagree here. I've got to disagree. And here's the only thing why. And I say this, I think he still has plenty of leverage. He's 25 years old. He's 25 years old. If he wants to sit out the whole season, he'll still come back and only be 26 years old and still be in the prime of his career, still for another 5 or 6 years, arguably, maybe even more, considering how long these quarterbacks are playing right now, right? Aaron Rodgers is pretty old right now. Tom Brady's pretty old right now. It just seems like quarterbacks now are just getting better like wine, right? Aging with wine. So it's really one of those things where I still think he has plenty of leverage, and he also has the no trade clause. So no matter who they want to make a deal with, he has the right to sign off on it or say, I don't want to go there. And that could have been the case with Philadelphia. We all don't know exactly the ins and outs of that. He could have said, I don't want to go to Philadelphia, so we're not making that, you know, play happen. And so I think the teams that a lot of people are bringing up is Denver is the number one choice that I think Deshaun Watson wants to go to. And you even said it. They have all the pieces ready to go to compete for a title and go pretty far in that West division of the AFC. But it's really one of those things where, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think the Texans, like you said, want to trade him for a bag of footballs, like you said. So it's just really one of those things where both of these guys have to come to some decision where everybody's going to win. But it's, I don't know, maybe at some point the Texans are going to lose out, and maybe at some point Deshaun Watson's going to lose out. It's really one of those things where it's a Mexican standoff right now, like a hard Mexican standoff. Nobody's winning right now, but I don't think that Deshaun Watson has lost any leverage considering his age and how many years he's got left playing this game. And we all saw, even with other players and other professional players that have sat out years and then come back and have come back healthy. There's one running back specifically that it's just drawing a blank right now, and you might be thinking
Williams.
Ricky Williams was one of them that just, you know, sat out a year. And there was another one too, where they sat out and then they came. Le'Veon Bell just most recently. And I know people are going to say, you know, he just signed with the Ravens practice squad and he didn't play much for the Chiefs last year. Well, that's because the Chiefs had a great running back already. They didn't really need him. And, you know, honestly, I think he's going to make his way off this Ravens practice squad considering the J.K. Dobbins injury. So it's just really one of those things where we've seen professional athletes sit out and still come back healthy and even more healthy at times, being ready to go. Another one is my man Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch was just like, you know what, I'm going to walk away from the game. I'm going to go do whatever I want in Oakland and help my city of Oakland for a year. And he did that for a year, and then he came back more healthy and was wrecking heads that next year when he came back and played for the Oakland Raiders at the time. So it's just really one of those things where I think we've seen this a lot, and it's just really one of those things where, yeah, I just think it's a standoff that is it could go through I could see it going the distance, honestly, where Deshaun Watson doesn't play at all this season, or I could see it going exactly the way you've seen it, where they were just like, hey, we've got to make a play. Is this producer Ben calling in to drop a dime on me?
No, well, here's what I just want to say, and I miss you guys. You know, I miss filling in for Pat when he gets those drive-through penalties. But What I want to say about Deshaun's leverage, why I think it's hurt, I don't think it's gone, but if I'm an NFL franchise owner or if I'm a head coach, yes, I know this guy has all the talent in the world, but am I going to want to put all my eggs in his basket? Meaning, like next year, if it's time to build your franchise, rebuild your franchise, are you going to want this guy? Because if you know what he's going to do if he gets mad, he's going to have his hissy fit like he does. And I get like lots of players do that. So there's no problem with, like, I personally don't like the way Aaron Rodgers is going about it. And I think Deshaun's pretty much pulling like an Aaron Rodgers. You know, Tom Brady, he stuck it out and he played hard till the end in New England. And he got he ended up going to a place where there's like a lot happening and stuff like that. I just don't know if Deshaun's going to have that. So I'll sign off and let you guys handle the rest of the show from here. I won't put in anymore, but Brandon, I'll see what you say. I'm just going to hang up. All right.
All right. That's fair.
All right.
Tom Brady didn't stick it out to the end, right? He started getting in a dispute with his coach. His coach just wanted to really go with the next young guy. And Tom Brady said, I still have plenty left, right? And it was one of those things where Tom Brady was like, either you give me an extension or I'm going to be out of here. And that's exactly what Tom Brady did. They didn't give him the extension. They let his contract expire, and Tom Brady moved to Tampa Bay and won another Super Bowl. So it's just really one of those things where I love producer Ben when he calls him like that. I knew it was him, and that was classic. But I just think he still has plenty of leverage. I really still do think he does, and it's so does the team, though. I think that's why I'm saying I think it's still a 50-50 here, and anything could happen.
Yeah, one thing real quick, because I know you want to move on to the next topic, is that, you know, what I would be worried about if I was another team is not even necessarily his attitude about this, because he's, you know, before this season, he's been a class act in Houston. Hopefully the off the field stuff we'll see what happens there. It's so complicated. But I'd be afraid, depending on what happens off the field with the sexual assault allegations, I'd be afraid that he's going to get suspended. And then if I'm a team that's in contention, let's say that the Rams traded for him before they went and got Stafford, okay? Let's say the Rams traded for Deshaun Watson, just like they traded for Stafford. And you have this Rams team. This is going to answer my next question, too, our next topic, which is crazy. You have this Rams team that has a ton of talent. They have a ton of guys on defense and offense that are getting paid a lot of money. So they know that they have like a 2-year window right now. That's why they went and got Stafford. And then you get Watson, and he gets suspended either at the end of this year or the start of next season, and you just load it up, and now your star quarterback that you just traded a bunch of first-round picks for is suspended, and you're not going to have him for this season when you have all these guys under these high salaries and your salary cap is exploding. You know, that's the fear that I think some of these teams have too, where if he's suspended, they're you know, up, you know what, creek without a paddle, you know. So it's one of those situations too where you're just worried about sort of the unknown with Deshaun Watson at this point.
No, and I get it. And I think that's what a lot of teams are saying exactly, is being like, man, we're going to have to give up a lot to get him. So we don't want to see him get suspended. But I think it's just really one of those things where we haven't seen much come out. Like I said, as far as those accusations, even proving it right or wrong, either way. So I think, like most people, are curious to see and hear what happens there. But even so, let's say, like, and I'm going to go on more your side here. Let's say that the accusations are found false, but let's say the NFL still says, you know, maybe a little bit of conduct was wrong on his behalf, and he still gets suspended like 3 or 4 games. That could still happen as well, because the way that the conduct rule is written at this point. So yeah, there's still a lot of things that can happen. But quickly before we move on, I just want to answer producer Ben's other question about him calling him a crybaby, because that sounds like going back to Bowman. Tim Bowman, when we had to talk to Tim Bowman on this show, producer Ben, let's talk about who created this situation. It wasn't Deshaun Watson. It was a guy that got fired off of this organization, Coach Bill O'Brien and the general manager. Both of those guys are the 2 guys that created this situation that forced Deshaun Watson to react to this situation. And I'm pretty sure both are gone right now, right? The general manager got fired, and there's a new general manager, and there's a new coach at this point. So
he's mad at the owner too, though. He's mad at Cal McNair. That's the big one.
True,
and he's not going anywhere.
He's not going to fire himself
Right.
So that's
Coach
really the
Bill
thing where it's just like I just don't want to see people being like, oh, Deshaun Watson created this situation. No, there's a lot of people that I think had their hands in creating this situation. But man, still plenty to talk about this, and we're going to cover it when it comes out more. But let's move on to another great topic, and that's NFL teams on the radar. Topic number 4 tonight, and who's going to be your pick of, maybe a new team that's on the radar. We've also, both of us got our local team, the New England Patriots, that we're certainly going to be rooting for. But beyond the Patriots, I guess our question is, who do you got on your radar, and why are you looking at them, Pat?
Yeah, and I just answered this question in this last topic. I'm fascinated. I don't know if I'm going to be rooting for them, but I am fascinated what's going to happen with the Los Angeles Rams this year, because they loaded up. They have this full salary cap. They have to win in the next couple of seasons, right? They have this coach who's a very brilliant offensive mind. You can say what you want about how he coached in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. From everything that's coming out of their, all the whispers coming out of the Rams camp is like they were just so fed up with the, the limitations they had with Jared Goff, where they just couldn't completely open up the playbook with Jared Goff, who was, a decent quarterback. He sort of got the job done, but towards the end, it just seemed like there were so many more limitations with him than a better quarterback than him. So they go out and they trade 2 first-round picks for Matthew Stafford. So they've traded 4 first-round picks for Stafford and Jalen Ramsey to go along with Aaron Donald on the defense, and then they just re-signed Leonard Floyd, who's a defensive end for the Rams, and then they also on the offensive side they gave extensions to Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, and Tyler Higbee I think is making like $9 million next year or something like that. So they have guys locked in. They don't have a ton of depth after that, and then unfortunately they just lost Cam Akers, who I think they were counting on as gonna be this dynamic running back, who he absolutely was. So he tears his ACL. They go out and they get Sony Michel on a cheap contract, but I'm fascinated to see what happens with the Rams this year. I think they're going to sling it all year long with Stafford back there. He can certainly throw the ball downfield much better than Jared Goff. I want to see Stafford in a situation where he can be successful. You've seen so many really good players go to an organization, and some of them, they try to lift up that organization. But we were just talking about Deshaun Watson, who had an unbelievable year last year, but he had nothing around him. So the Texans were 4-12, I think, was their record last year, or it might have been slightly better than that. Stafford's been in that type of situation for years now in Detroit, where it was a mess when Matt Patricia was there. It was a mess before Matt Patricia. He did have Calvin Johnson at one point, and they started to seem like they were starting to ascend, and then Calvin Johnson retired. And it's just one thing after another in Detroit. Now he's in this great situation with an offensive coach who's got a great system, he's got good weapons, and he's got a good defense behind him where they can make a run at the postseason. Now, they play in one of the toughest divisions in the NFL, but I'm just fascinated to see what happens with the Rams, because this could go really well for them, or this could go really poorly over the next couple of seasons.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great choice, and I'm not going to lie. They've been really one of my favorite teams ever since they moved back to L.A. I just love the way that they market their team. I'm a big Sean McVay fan. I love their uniforms, right? They're always busting out a new uniform helmet combination that just looks amazing, and I love watching that defense with Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald. It's just a great combination of, rushing the passer and then covering on the back end as well. That's just amazing. So I think that's a great pick. And even to just, add a little bit more to your pick, I am really looking forward to seeing what Matt Stafford can do with Cooper Kupp. I think that's going to be a combination that we're really going to enjoy watching this season, especially myself. But I've got a couple other teams here. I've got a couple of teams, and I'm going to go through them really quickly. The first one is the Bengals. I'm really looking to see what the Bengals can do with getting their quarterback back, Joe Burrow being healthy and coming back, after missing a handful of games last year. And I think the games that he did play last year, he looked really good, especially for a rookie. He was developing, and he honestly had a chance to maybe win Rookie of the Year if he played the whole year against Justin Herbert. But obviously taking that knee injury, that was big for him. But he rehabbed it really fast and is looking to bounce back. And he's going to get my vote for the comeback player of the year, no doubt, because I think he's going to have a strong season. But why I'm really looking forward to the Bengals is obviously with him coming back off the injury, but with them adding Jamar Chase on the outside at wide receiver with their number 1 pick out of LSU, a guy that played with Joe Burrow. And when they played together at LSU, boy, were they a dynamic duo and an amazing combination. And then even in the preseason, the little bit that we've got to see out of them, they looked great together. So that's one team that I'm looking forward to watching and looking forward to seeing maybe them bust out of their shell and maybe even compete for a playoff spot if they can play really well. But here's two other teams, and guess what? They're two teams we mentioned earlier on the show, and that is the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both teams that are 100% vaccinated and are not going to have to deal with COVID issues, if many, right? And I'm not going to say they're not going to have to deal with that at all, but it's going to be very limited. So they're going to be able to just focus in on winning football games. And I'm really looking forward to seeing with what Kyle Pitts can do with Matt Ryan. Obviously, I think that's going to be an amazing duo. And then in Tampa Bay, I'm looking to see, can this team, they've pretty much re-signed all their starters from last year to try to make a run at another Super Bowl. Tom Brady's trying to make another run at a Super Bowl. So it's just really the question of, can they do that? So I'm really looking forward to seeing that team compete. Looking forward to seeing the Atlanta Falcons compete, especially with Kyle Pitts stepping on the field. And then I'm really looking forward to seeing what Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase can do together again.
Yeah, no question. There was so much player movement in the offseason because you had the salary caps kind of situations where guys were getting traded and getting moved because of salary cap reasons. And you had, a couple of, Phillip Rivers is now out of the NFL. Drew Brees is now in the NFL. So both their franchises that they just left, Rivers just left the Colts and the Saints, and Drew Brees just left the Saints. So now you have two teams that were trying to compete for playoff spots now and searching for quarterbacks once again. So those teams are very interesting as well. So there's so much player movement. This is going to be a very interesting season in the NFL for sure. Now, we obviously said, let's not talk about the Patriots because we know that's the team that we're most excited to see in this upcoming season. So we're going to move on to topic number 5. It's going to be an F1 topic. A lot going on in F1 right now. This is probably one of the most exciting times of the year. But we're going to kick things off with our F1 coverage with Max Verstappen, who just won the Dutch Grand Prix on Sunday. That's his home race. And the Orange Army was out this weekend for Max Verstappen. Brandon Verstappen taking home first place in the Dutch Grand Prix.
Yeah, well, first I want to say, hey, if you're new to this show, give us a subscribe, give us a like here, and give us a follow, all right? We're on a mission to hitting 1,000 subs. And, hey, we've been delivering a lot of great F1 content here from the States, and we've been getting a lot of subs for that. So let's keep it up. We love all our subscribers from around the world, honestly. So just keep it up. Give us a subscribe here. Give us a like if you're liking Comeback Sports here, and we'll keep delivering some great content of especially F1. But yeah, I got to start off with first, and I know producer Ben is going to remember this because he looks in the comments a lot. But I wonder if one of our top commenters, Willie Van Loon, was at the Dutch Grand Prix. Seems like Willie Van Loon's always got something to say when we're talking about F1, especially Max Verstappen. So if he wasn't at the Grand Prix, I'm going to be a little disappointed because the rest of the Orange Army was out there, like you said. And boy, was that amazing to see. Really, my hat's off to the Dutch, putting on an amazing Grand Prix, showing out with the fans. And you could even hear from many of the drivers saying, boy, are we happy to see the stands packed and see all these fans back. And, man, they're popping their orange smoke out there. And even in practice, they were popping the orange smoke and the orange fog and supporting their number one statesman, Max Verstappen, one of the best drivers in Formula One right now. And he's on a hunt to get his first Formula One championship. And he's in a tough battle with Lewis Hamilton right now, and arguably one of the best battles and really one of the best rivalries we've seen in F1 over the last decade, I'd say. So this is really one of the best seasons and one of the most exciting seasons we've had here most recently. And with about, I think, 8 or 9 races left, it's just going to get tighter here as we go. But Max Verstappen did an amazing job winning the Dutch Grand Prix, was pretty much, out there leading most of the practices. I think in practice 1, the Ferraris topped the charts. In practice 2, the Mercedes looked good. In practice 3, Max Verstappen really put his foot down and really showed that he was going to be the guy leading the Grand Prix. And then in qualifying, had himself an amazing qualifying to get on pole. And you could just see the excitement and the drive that was pushing him around the track, knowing that it was his Grand Prix and that every turn and every corner he took, there was just orange shirts in a sea of orange. he just knew all that support was there for him. So it's just got to be an amazing feeling when you go to your home Grand Prix and see all that support. And then on top of it, for him to, take all that pressure, come out on Sunday and have a masterclass of a drive and pretty much, almost lead almost every lap in the race at one point. The only reason he didn't lead every lap in the race was because of the, the mix up in strategy. And so they had a pit stop him at one point where Valterri Botas, where they were trying a potential one stop for him. So Valtteri got in front on the hard tire compound, but with a new set of tires on there, Max Verstappen hunted him down pretty fast, got by him. And at that point, it didn't even let Lewis Hamilton close the gap like I think Mercedes was hoping they were going to do, was close the gap down a little bit and let Lewis have a chance to maybe get a bite at him. But Valtteri did everything he could do, especially legally, defensive-wise in the car. Max Verstappen was just the best driver on the track that day and that weekend. He had himself a great Dutch Grand Prix, his home Grand Prix. He earned that win, and it was good to see, and it was amazing to see that crowd supporting him.
Yeah, no question. I mean, whether or not you like Red Bull or whether or not you like Max Verstappen, to see a driver in his home race, we mentioned it with Lewis Hamilton winning the British Grand Prix. Anytime you're in your home race and you see those fans, sporting the colors and how they react to it. Just when he passed Botas too, you saw the crowd just go nuts, and it's just awesome to see in F1. But just not only winning that race, but that was the one that catapulted him back to the top of the standings again here in F1 too. I mean, you mentioned pressure. There's definitely pressure there for Verstappen to come through. And for that to happen, I mean, that was just great for the fans, very exciting for all the fans of Verstappen and of Red Bull that were at that race too. But like you mentioned, this is going to be a battle down the stretch. I mean, over, a couple of races ago, you were like, oh, this, Lewis Hamilton might pull away here. It was Verstappen for most of the year. Then Verstappen got in that crash, and then it just wasn't the same for him for a couple of races. We're talking about the technology and the Red Bull car, and was Lewis Hamilton going to run away with it? Now we have Verstappen take the lead. I think the lead in the standings is going to seesaw a lot throughout the rest of the season. You mentioned 8 or 9 races left. We could see a seesaw of leads, 5 or 6 times maybe, depending on how these guys finish out the season. So it's going to just be an awesome, finish to this year's F1 run, and especially after last year when there was less races, and even though it was a good season, it just didn't feel like the same. Now you have the fans back, you have more races, a full grid of races this season, and this is what F1 fans have been waiting for, to have this kind of home stretch this year.
Yeah, I think all of us fans are excited to see this battle just continue on. And you mentioned Max Verstappen taking the lead in the Constructors' title now by 3 points due to him winning that race. And at Zandvoort, at his home Grand Prix, certainly a race that he's never going to forget, and rightfully so, with all that support that he saw there. And then the race that he put down, the master class of a drive that he put down to earn that win. But just quickly, man, Zandvoort, that track is amazing, especially when we're talking about maybe going on for just one lap pace, qualifying pace going around. You even heard many drivers, including Lewis Hamilton, say, man, I love this track, especially on a low fuel run on those red tires where we're really just attacking it. And, it's just an amazing track with all the changes of elevation and then the high speed turns. It was an amazing track to see. And I'm glad that F1 decided to go back there. But let's be honest and let's be real. The one main reason that F1 returned to Zandvoort after so many years was Max Verstappen and all the support that he was going to get and all those fans turning out and all the dollars that was going to generate for not only the track, but also for Formula One and for all the teams. So I think it was a great play by Formula One, and cheers to Red Bull and cheers to Max Verstappen for getting that win. But I think there was also a couple of other great things that made this Dutch Grand Prix an amazing race. His teammate, Sergio Perez, had an amazing race starting from the pit lane due to his car having to, having to take many replacement parts due to a crash previously. But he had an amazing race, passing so many people to get himself back into the points. And at one point, he got on the team radio and he said, "Do you like that? Who's next?" And he just kept passing guys left and right. All right. And then another great point of the race that I liked was Valterri Botas. All right. It was on a fast lap at one point where Lewis Hamilton had the fastest lap point and that was a key point for the championship, but they got Valterri on a set of reds. He set a purple sector 1, and people were like, oh man, is he going to steal that point? He set a purple sector 2. And then at that point, the strategist Valtteri, James Allison for Mercedes got on the line, team radio, and said, Valtteri, please back off your fastest lap attempt. We need that point for Lewis pretty much. And he did back off in the final sector. But the craziest part was his first 2 sectors were so fast, he still set the fastest lap. And so that forced it where Lewis Hamilton, you heard him even jump on the radio saying, guys, I need that point. I need that lap. And Bono said, roger that, Lewis, we've got you. Come on in. We're going to get a 1 extra stop here. We're going to put you on reds. And then Lewis Hamilton snuck out the fastest lap on literally the last lap of the race to steal that point back to make sure that only Max Verstappen would only be leading by 3 points after this race. So it was an amazing race all of around for a lot of teams. And I think a lot of teams had some great races, and you've seen a lot of great racing and a lot of great showing from a lot of great drivers. But obviously, we've got to tip our hat to the number 1 guy there that won his race, won his home Grand Prix, and that's Max Verstappen showing up and winning the Dutch Grand Prix. But let's move on tonight to some other great news in F1, and that's the F1 driver deals and driver moves. And we are deep into silly season here in F1, where you're hearing other drivers moving to other teams or rumors of other drivers moving to other teams. And now we're starting to see confirmation. And, I'll tell you what, that started off that domino effect was our topic number 7 that we're going to cover, and that's Kimi Raikkonen retiring. Once Kimi Raikkonen said that he was going to retire, it started to be a domino effect of drivers saying, well, here's where I'm going to be for 2022. And we've just seen a couple of moves here announced just over the last few days and another one announced just this morning. So what do you got on it, Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you just said, that it's so interesting how much of a domino effect there is when there's movement. Excuse me. When there's movement in F1 racing, because like you mentioned, Raikkonen, announces he's done at the end of the year. He's leaving Alfa Romeo. He's retiring, and then that gives an opening to Valterri Botas, who has been such a good teammate to Lewis Hamilton over the last 5 years with Mercedes, and even Hamilton's come out and said he's the best teammate I ever could have asked for. In the way that he helps him out during races, and as awesome as it probably is to race with Mercedes and to race with one of the greatest drivers ever, at some point, a competitor like Botas is going to say, I want my own thing. I want to be the top dog. And that's what he wants right now. So he's going to be with Alfa Romeo next year. And then because he's leaving Mercedes, Mercedes is now promoting George Russell, who's, there's been some debate as to whether or not he's been ready. But I know Mercedes, recently has said, over the last 3 years, we've really liked how Russell has developed. He's hit all the marks that we've wanted him to hit. And we're ready for him to come up next season. So I think it was almost like a mutual parting of the ways with Botas and Mercedes. And then Botas even then just came out and said, if they only offered me a 1-year deal, I wouldn't have taken it anyways. I still would have left. So Botas wanted to leave if he wasn't going to get at least a 2-year deal. And now Mercedes is saying, we have Hamilton for 2 more years after this season. We want to start this younger driver, George Russell, teaming up with Hamilton, learning from Hamilton over the next 2 years so that whatever happens with Hamilton after that, we now have a young guy with 2 years of experience with one of the greatest drivers ever to now be able to take over for Mercedes. So I think this actually works out really well for Mercedes. And then because George Russell left Williams, now Alex Albon has been promoted again to Williams. And Alex Albon, if you watch Drive to Survive, it was a tough spot for him at Red Bull. He had to perform almost flawlessly to keep that spot. He didn't. Just seems like a really good guy. So I'm just happy for Albon. I'm happy he's getting a chance with Williams, and it's going to be fun to watch him race. But I'm sure there's going to be more fallout from this as well, because now at Alfa Romeo, they don't know who Botas is going to be racing with next year. So there's just a lot of different components to this, and a lot of pieces are going to fall into place as the season goes on.
Yeah, there's still a few seats that are undecided, and I would think over the next few weeks we'll get to see the rest of the grid get filled up with the 2022 drivers. But yeah, let's get to these moves here, which were amazing moves, big news in Formula One with these drivers here. especially let's start with Valtteri Botas moving on from Mercedes and going on to Alfa Romeo. And like you said, at Mercedes, he was obviously the clear-cut number 2 driver behind Lewis Hamilton, arguably one of the best drivers of all time, if not the best driver of all time, with arguably Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher. You have to put him up there. And so to have that as your teammate in F1, inevitably you are always compared to your teammate first off, and you're always racing your teammate. So, man, that's such a tough teammate to have to go up against. But I want to really tip my hat to Valtteri Botas. I loved him. I think he's done a great job over these last 5 years. 9 wins, 54 podiums, and 4 constructors titles that he helped contribute to Mercedes-AMG F1 over these last 4 to 5 years. So he has just done an amazing job as Lewis's teammate, helping push this team to the front. And we've said many a times when Lewis Hamilton maybe stumbled and wasn't there to win the race, well, Valtteri Botas was there to pick up the pieces for Mercedes-Benz and to get the wins usually. And like I said, 9 wins, 54 podiums. That is an amazing job with his time there at Mercedes. So I really think he's done a great job. And he really has been really Lewis Hamilton's best teammate and has done a great job at Mercedes. And I really want to thank you personally, Valtteri Botas, for what you've done for F1 and what you've done for Mercedes. And I've enjoyed watching your time there. And I'm now even more excited to now see him go be the driver number 1, a clear-cut driver number 1, the leader of the team at Alfa Romeo. And I think that's going to be exciting for not only F1 fans, but obviously for Valtteri Botas stepping into a new role as the leader of the team. And the rumor around the F1 paddock is that potentially Alfa Romeo might be switching engines too, and switching engine suppliers. Currently, they're supplied by Ferrari. Rumor has it that they might be switching to a Mercedes-Benz engine in 2022. Now, wouldn't that be classic for Valtteri Botas to come to Alfa Romeo and have a Mercedes-Benz engine to basically rely on and have as your crutch? So I honestly think that is going to be big news that we're going to have to cover here in the offseason as well, if the rumors are true. But I think it is true. I think Alfa Romeo is going to be replacing their engine and switching to Mercedes, specifically because they're bringing in a Mercedes driver that has all that experience with the engine, is going to be able to help them propel their new car in this new age of regulations with this new Mercedes-Benz engine. And I think Valtteri Botas is going to do a great job leading that team. But like you said, it started that domino with Kimi Raikonnen retiring, saying that he was going to step away from the game, and we're going to cover that next. But then Botas goes over to Alfa Romeo, and then that opens up the door for the promotion that I think most people wanted to see. Honestly, probably last year, I think most people wanted to see it, but rightfully so. Valtteri Botas had done enough to earn another year in that Mercedes-Benz seat. But George Russell getting promoted from Williams to Mercedes-Benz. And I think this is the biggest news, honestly, of the promotions and of the driver moves. Having George Russell move to a car now where he can he's promoted to, one of the best cars on the grid, where he's going to have a chance to go and maybe fight Lewis Hamilton, fight Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc for a title. He's really one of the best drivers on the grid. We got to see it last year in 2020 at the Sakir Grand Prix when he substituted in for Lewis Hamilton when Lewis Hamilton tested positive for COVID. George Russell had a masterclass drive and pretty much had a chance to win the race multiple times if it wasn't for a mix-up in tires from Mercedes during a pit stop and then a right rear puncture, I believe, that he took when he put on a set of red tires that really cost him that Grand Prix. Otherwise, he would have clearly got his first win as a Formula One racer. But now, getting promoted to Mercedes, a spot that he wanted so bad, a spot that the fans wanted him to have so bad, I think this is going to be exciting news. Lewis Hamilton welcomed him to the team with a huge post. And, producer Ben just popped it up right here where, George Russell has followed Lewis Hamilton since he was a child. So now he's going to get to drive next to his childhood hero, 2 British drivers on, arguably the best team in Formula One right now, propelling this team in the new regulations. So I'm really excited to see what Mercedes can do with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton in 2022. But then also you brought up now Alex Albon getting a chance to come back to F1, getting promoted from the Red Bull reserve driver seat to getting into the Williams seat now. And he's going to come back to F1. And I think rightfully so. I think he should have, stayed on the grid. They just couldn't find a spot for him last year. And, it's been brought up that, you can't feel bad for Red Bull drivers because Red Bull has 4 seats that they can stick drivers in, more than any other team on the grid right now. And so you couldn't feel bad for Alex Albon if he didn't get a seat, because Christian Horner could have stuck him in either 2 of those Red Bull seats or the AlphaTauri seats that are controlled by Red Bull. Instead, they wanted to go with Perez and Verstappen, rightfully so, obviously. And then AlphaTauri said they're going to stick with Gasly, rightfully so, and then Yuki Tsunoda because he's got the power and the backing of Honda. So it's just really one of those things where I think Alex Albon actually lucked out at this point, because he's not going into a Red Bull seat. He's going into a potential Williams seat that has a Mercedes engine. And there was rumor that Mercedes might even block that move. But lucky for Alex Albon, they didn't. And he's going to be back on the grid. And I do think he rightfully so does belong back on the grid of F1. So I think it's exciting moves here. And we still got more moves to go.
Yeah, no question. And you mentioned Gasly. We saw him get demoted from the Red Bull number 2 seat a couple of years ago, and he's been awesome ever since. I mean, he's been, I think he's won at least once, if not twice, over the last couple of years. And this year he's had a bunch of top 10s. He finished 4th. What was it, last week or the week before? So he's been awesome this year, especially considering where he's racing from. So, you have a guy who recovered after getting demoted. It's such a tough thing to hear that you're not, they don't think you're the guy. And then, you kind of get inside your own head. But I think, we could see Albon do something similar where he's in a situation where he can say, all right, you missed out on me. I'm this new hotshot young driver too. And then have a couple of seasons like Gasly's been having over the past couple of years. So it'll be interesting to watch him over the next couple of seasons as well.
Yep.
Like you mentioned before, we're going to move on to topic number 7, and that one is Kimi Raikkonen, who has retired from F1 racing. He's obviously going to finish up the season for Alfa Romeo, but the Iceman, Kimi Raikkonen, I know you're a big fan, Brandon, so what do you think about this guy retiring?
Huge Kimi Raikkonen fan, the Iceman of Formula One, the most experienced driver on the Formula One grid, the oldest driver on the grid. But honestly, he still had a lot of talent left in the tank, and I still think we've seen that this year. Even though at times his teammate Antonio Giovinazzi has outdriven him in the same car, I still think Kimi Raikkonen has proven his worth as an F1 driver this year. And I think he was the one that made this decision in the end. I think if I was Alfa Romeo, I clearly would have wanted Kimi Raikkonen back. And if I had the chance to pair him up with the likes of Valterri Botas, I would have had really one of the strongest grid pairings on the grid with 2 of the most experienced drivers and 2 of the best drivers, honestly. But I really think going back to when F1 said that they were going to change the regulations in 2022, that Kimi Raikkonen said, well, I think, you know what, I'm not going to move on with those change of regulations. And then when he really got a look at the car, the new car of 2022, I really don't think he was impressed at all. I don't think he liked it. This is a guy that at many a times has said that F1 is his hobby and that he did not have to be driving Formula One anymore, and that he just continued to doing it because he loved doing it. He loved the current cars. He loved to go fast, and he loved driving these current cars. So then when you take away these current cars and you switch the regulations and you bring in a whole new car, I really think Kimi Raikkonen was not impressed and was like, this is my time to step away. I'm not going to move on to these new regulations. I'm just going to kind of enjoy this like final moment and ride off into the sun in an amazing fast car in these current F1 regulations. But like I said, we're talking about a guy that's been around for decades and has brought, honestly, some of the greatest moments to Formula One history. First off, he is the 2007 Formula One champion. So he's got a driver's championship underneath his belt, man. So that's something that is, we all know, is hard to do. This guy pulled it off in 2007 and arguably had a couple other years where he put up a good fight and had a chance to win another one. But I think he's really one of the best drivers on the grid over these last 20 years. And right now, he's got the record for the most laps in an F1 car in history. He's driven the most laps in an F1 car in history. And I think it's going to be a while before we see that broken. And we might not even see that broken because you're going to have it broken by maybe the likes of either Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, or Sebastian Vettel. the other most experienced drivers that are going to still be left on the grid. If they want to continue on many more years, maybe they have a chance of breaking that record. But I really think it's a record that I think is going to be safe with Kimi Raikkonen, with the most laps driven in an F1 car in history, which I think is amazing. That just tells you the longevity of how long he's been around. And we all know it's hard to stick around in F1. We were just talking about how Alex Albon got demoted in the blink of an eye, right? And in the blink of a second. And a lot of other drivers, the F1's one of those things where, what have you done for me lately? If you haven't done good, you haven't won races, you haven't pushed our car into the points, well, guess what? There's a lot of up-and-coming drivers in F2 and even in F3 or in Formula E at this point now that they're looking to bring up in and replace drivers that aren't getting it done. And that just shows you that Kimi Raikkonen was getting it done year after year, whether or not he was driving for Sauber or whether or not he was driving for Ferrari or for most recently driving for Alfa Romeo. Kimi Raikkonen was still showing that he was one of the best drivers on the grid, a class act, really one of the funniest drivers on the grid. This guy delivered some of the best one-liners, I think, in F1 history when we're talking about, one-liners, especially, give me my gloves. My gloves is one of them. And if you got to look back to that, the Brazilian Grand Prix where he wanted his glove so bad, and other times where he took an ice cream break during a red flag because he knew, the race was going to be over. So he went in the garage and grabbed himself an ice cream. Or my favorite Kimi Raikkonen moment was in the Monaco Grand Prix when the car failed on him and his engine gave way. He just got out of the car, and instead of walking back to the paddock, he walked back to his yacht, stripped himself of his helmet and his race suit, and began, drinking a couple of drinks on his yacht and enjoying that Monaco life. I think, besides those legendary moments off the track, Kimi Raikkonen has provided a lot of legendary moments on the track as well.
Yeah, no question. I mean, you look at a guy who's got 21 career wins, over 100 podiums in his career. Certainly an incredibly successful driver in F1, like you mentioned. Exciting to watch. Whether, like you said, whether it was with McLaren, Ferrari a second time, Alfa Romeo most recently. The guy's been awesome. He hasn't had a win since 2018. So you wonder, you mentioned he hasn't liked the car with Alfa Romeo recently. But he also mentioned, it's hard to stay on the F1 circuit for that long, and you do wonder, he's 41 years old. Is he starting to lose that intensity to have to be that you need to be on the circuit? Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, they seem like good guys out of the car, but as soon as they get in that car, they want to rip each other's throat out because they're just that competitive. And Raikkonen was certainly that during his career, but you wonder over the last couple of years, does he still have that edge? And maybe he doesn't. Who knows? I mean, he's certainly still got the talent. He's produced somewhat, but he hasn't gotten a win since 18. You do wonder if he's just lost that edge a little bit. And the best at what they do when they lose that edge, say, maybe it's time for me to hang him up. So maybe that's what's going on with Raikkonen. But storybook career has been incredibly successful. Like you mentioned, a lot of fun to watch, very entertaining driver. And yeah, I mean, if the race is over, why would you just want to go on your yacht in Monaco and have a couple of cocktails? That's what I do too. So good for him. But yeah, the sport's going to miss him, especially for the entertainment value of Raikkonen.
Yeah, I think, like you said, that the entertainment value, he was probably one of the most entertaining drivers on the grid. And, whether it be in his press conferences or, his interviews or even his team radio where, he got I believe it was at Imola last year in 2020, he had to serve a 5-second penalty. And his engineer gets on the radio and says, "Hey, we have a 5-second penalty." And he goes, "For what?" And then the guy goes, we've got a 5-second penalty. And he goes, "For what?" Like he wanted to hear exactly what it was for. And so he's just got so many great memories and moments that he's done in Formula One over these last 2 decades. But yeah, you brought up his last win in 2018, and that was when he was driving for Ferrari, one of the best cars on the grid. And I think it's one of those things where if he still could be in one of the best cars, I still think he'd have that edge because he'd still be fighting in the front and he still has the talent to do it. But, being an Alfa Romeo, being a back marker and being at the back of the grid and seeing Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton and even your old teammate Sebastian Vettel flying by you, I think it's just really one of those things where you're like, yeah, you know what, maybe I want to go lay on that yacht a little bit more and just enjoy my life at this point. But watch out for Kimi Raikkonen's son as well, who Kimi Raikkonen a lot of times goes karting with him. He's a young up and coming guy. I mean, he's only, I believe he's less than 10 years old. But honestly, I could see Robin Raikkonen being an F1 driver coming up because he's just grown up around the sport, kind of like a Max Verstappen. And his dad just loves karting and loves motorsport, where I don't think Kimi Raikkonen is going to step away from motorsports at all. I still think he's going to be enjoying that because he's even said this is his hobby. This is what he loves to do. So I still think even in his retirement, he's going to be looking for some way to go fast. And honestly, if I'm a team in maybe DTM or GTE or endurance racing, you know, if I'm looking for a driver, I'm probably going to look to try to see if I can recruit Kimi Raikkonen. Or honestly, a lot of times you'll see Formula One drivers go to IndyCar. So I've got to wonder if IndyCar is going to try to make a play to get Kimi Raikkonen into one of their cars. Or is in the end, is Kimi Raikkonen going to say, you know what, no, I'm hanging it up for good and I'm done with racing. So that's going to be the question here over these next few months here is once this season's over, is Kimi Raikkonen just going to say, I'm done with racing, I'm going to be chilling on my yacht? Or am I going to go to F1 or GTE or DTM or whatever it may be or other form of racing? But yeah, inevitably, this guy is a legend in F1 and he's given us so many great moments here and we're certainly going to miss him. But hey, let's move on. Let's move on to topic number 8. And like I said, hey, if you're new to this show, give us a subscribe, give us a like here. We're on a mission to get 1,000 subs and we're on our way there. We're going to skyrocket there to the top. So, hey, give us a like and give us a sub here. But let's move on tonight to topic number 8. And that's the dominance that Alabama showed in their week 1 performance. And first off, college football is back, an exciting time. And boy, did they have themselves a great week 1.
Yeah, and, you know, Alabama has been so good for so long now. Nick Saban's obviously still there. You were wondering, you know, especially after watching the NFL draft and seeing Mac Jones get taken in the first round, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, you know, the Patriots drafted a defensive lineman out of Alabama in the second round. They had a bunch of offensive linemen go in the first and second round. They had some defensive players go in the first and second round. They had so much talent just get drafted into the NFL. And now you're like, okay, is this the year where they're not rebuilding, but maybe they take a little bit of a step back? Then you see in week 1 they're playing, you know, a team that a lot of people thought is going to be a decent team, not necessarily a national championship contender in Miami, but a team that, you know, they're ranked 14 coming into this game. And then Alabama just gets on the field and just smokes them, just absolutely smokes them. I mean, Bryce Young, a lot of people have been talking about, you know, why didn't Bryce Young start over Mac Jones last year? And supposedly Young, you know, he's got this big arm, he's super athletic, but Mac Jones had a better command of the huddle. You know, Young was just a freshman last year. And then he comes out in his sophomore season and throws for, you know, 340-something yards and 4 touchdowns. And you know, he's throwing to wide open guys half the time too. But they're just loaded again. I mean, it's just like bring in the next guy, you know, next man up for Alabama. It's unbelievable how much talent they have, but they're also well coached too. I mean, they execute plays perfectly. You know, coming out of the draft, everybody was saying, well, Mac Jones, he's accurate because he's throwing to wide open receivers. Well, the reason those guys are wide open is because the right play was called, the receivers ran the great routes, and the quarterback put the ball on the money at the correct time. So it was executed to perfection. That's why it looks so easy. And that's what this Alabama program is now. It was before when Alabama was sort of like the running back university for a while. Now it's like, you know, since really Tua and even Jalen Hurts, who is technically, you know, sort of an Alabama product, obviously most of his career in Alabama, you've now got really good quarterbacks going to Alabama. And at what point, I know it's just the first week of the season, but at what point are we just going to be like, it's not even fair anymore that these guys are getting the top quarterbacks now, the top receivers, stud running backs. They've always been able to recruit really good defensive players. So what do they not have that's like a top tier talent on their team now? They're just so loaded again. I don't see how they're not, you know, I don't see them losing, I guess is what I'm going to say.
Punter potentially, because they never have to punt, honestly. I mean, that's potentially the only position that they don't have to load up on and re-recruit every year. because they, reload every year, and it's that next guy up. And clearly they just get the best players, and they have the best recruiting every year to be able to refill these positions. And you brought up a great point where, they were running back you at one point where you had, Mark Ingram coming out of there. You had TJ Yeldon, you had Derrick Henry. But now you're looking at it as being quarterback you with, Mac Jones, Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa. And now they've got this kid, Bryce Young, that just looks amazing. And I've talked about having a mobile quarterback and that most coaches want a mobile quarterback. This kid is it, man. And when I was watching that game, I was really excited. And you're going to love this. And maybe some other fans won't like this. I'm going to say that he is better than all three of those previous quarterbacks, honestly. From what I just saw from that one game and the talent level that I saw that he could put out there and get it. I get it. People are going to say it was just one game, man. Well, I'm guaranteeing you he's going to do that again this week and probably all season because he looked amazing. Not only was he making the right decisions and making the right reads, then he was also, when he was getting put under pressure, he was making plays with his legs, getting outside of the pocket, moving the pocket, throwing on the run, and just throwing absolute dimes to these receivers. So it was just like, even when the defense had a play for him, he had the answer for them. And it was just like, man, Alabama's offense looked unstoppable right now with Bryce Young leading it. And then, like you said, Michi, they still got a lot of great wide receivers out there that can get it done. And they just reload every year in every position. And it's just really one of those things where they were the number one team and they look like the number one team once again. And I don't know, man. I know it was only 1 week, but I got to see them as the favorite right now going into the season and even going into the playoffs. When that comes around, they're still going to be one of those top 4 teams, definitely. But man, yeah, you brought up their great coaching, clearly led by Nick Saban, was a former NFL coach, and then has just had an amazing career coaching in college football. But on his staff, he's got the likes of, like a Doug Marrone coaching the offensive line. Doug Marrone, the former head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, willing to come on and be an assistant under Nick Saban and just make that coaching staff even better. And, he's obviously had other great coaches like Lane Kiffin being the offensive coordinator, who's now the, head coach over at Ole Miss. And then he obviously had Bill O'Brien on this staff currently, right? I believe Bill O'Brien is now on this staff. Yeah. Yep. So it's just like, man, they do have amazing coaches. They're putting it out. And honestly, the amount of competition that they have daily in practice is, they believe, the thing why this program is so good, because every day in practice, Nick Saban is keeping it at a high level, keeping the competition up. They're literally just sharpening iron on iron every day. So then when game day comes around, they're just ready to rock, man.
Yeah, the most successful teams, a lot of times practices are harder than the actual games themselves. They put their players in such a stressful situation in practice, the games almost seem sort of easier. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. Georgia, had such an impressive defensive weekend. You wonder if they're the one team, because their defense has been so good, that could maybe slow down Alabama. We'll see. That's going to be an interesting matchup heading down the stretch of the SEC. But, they just look unstoppable right now. We're going to move on to topic number 9 here in college football, and that is, Brandon, what was your biggest surprise over the weekend in college football? There were, a ton of games. Some of them were, really good matchups, like in Alabama-Miami, where there were teams in the top 25 going at it. Some of them were, big-time teams against FCS teams. So what was your biggest surprise over the weekend in college football?
Well, there was a couple. You bring up the FCS team. UConn losing to local Holy Cross. Holy Cross, pretty much ending the UConn coach's career at this point by, after that loss, he said he was going to retire. And then 24 hours later, he quit. So it's just really one of those things where you're seeing an FCS team beat a Division I team, and then you see the blowback of how that can happen on a coaching staff. So I think that was huge, but good for Holy Cross out of Worcester, Massachusetts here. I think that was big news for them, getting the dub there and beating UConn. So that was a huge surprise there. I think one of the biggest surprises of the weekend. But then also you brought it up, and that's Georgia absolutely dismantling Clemson. Clemson, a team that, has been great over these last 5 years, or honestly over this last decade in college football, and has been the other team that has been up there with Alabama fighting for a championship every year. they absolutely got dismantled and embarrassed by a Georgia Bulldogs team that looks like they're the real deal. And like you said, could potentially give a great matchup to Alabama. And guess what? We're going to get to see that because it's the SEC, obviously the powerful, biggest, competitive league in college football right now. You're obviously going to get to see the best teams in college football play each other in the regular season, which that makes it so exciting. So I can't wait for that Georgia versus Alabama matchup to come. I think that's going to be amazing. But I think that was a big surprise, just how big of an upset, I think you could call it an upset because Clemson has been so dominant over the last decade, and they were even expected to be, great this year again. To have Georgia go in there and only give up a few points and have their defense play amazing and just shut down Clemson and embarrass them, I think that was a huge surprise. And then finally, a big Florida State fan, Florida State coming out and having a great showing against Notre Dame, a top-ranked team that, a lot of people have this Notre Dame team getting into the playoffs. Well, Florida State took them to the wire and even took them into overtime. And I think this is really one of the best Florida State teams that we've seen over the last 5 years. But at one point, Florida State's quarterback took an injury, had his helmet knocked off, had to come out for a game. And then in comes the story of Mackenzie Milton coming back from a horrific knee injury in 2018 when he played at the University of Central Florida, when he put Central Florida on the map that year and arguably had them as a national title contender. He took a huge career-ending injury, they thought, potentially life-ending, because it was that bad that they had to stabilize his knee and stabilize his vitals on the field in 2018. He comes back, rehabs that knee, comes back to the game of football, comes back, gets on the field, and plays amazing. And boy, did he look amazing. I mean, to me, that was the feel-good story of college football in week one. And I think the best story of college football, seeing Mackenzie Milton come back on the field and have success for Florida State.
Yeah, awesome story for him. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this has been one of the more, impressive Florida State teams, at least talent-wise, and how they play. We've seen in a few years. It's been a few years since they've been really, in the top 25, really competitive. So actually a decent win for Notre Dame to kind of pull out down in Tallahassee, but an impressive showing from Florida State, no question. The biggest, looking at the top rankings coming into the season, it was kind of like, okay, it's the same old colleges. It's Alabama, it's Georgia, it's Clemson, and it's Ohio State. And then, here's the rankings of everybody else. And you were saying, we were saying, like, who's going to be the team that might challenge or might try to get up into that top four or be one of those teams that can challenge that top part of the rankings. One of the teams that was highly rated was Iowa State at number 7. Over the weekend, for their opening weekend, they played Northern Iowa. Now, Northern Iowa is an FCS college football team. They don't compete in the football subdivision against the big boys in the SEC and the Big
Bowl
Ten
series.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So they're a lower level team, and Iowa State won, but they won 16-10. And it's just looking at this Iowa State team. I know it's the first week of the season, but if you want to be one of those top 10 teams, and you want to be a team that tries to, penetrate that force field that is the SEC, sort of big, Ohio State and Clemson group of teams that have been so good over the years, you got to do better than this against Northern Iowa. I mean, Iowa State, it's not like they're talented and young either. They have a ton of guys coming back from last year. I believe they had 10 starters from the offensive side of the ball coming back this season, including their top quarterback, Brock Purdy. And, they have a bunch of guys from the defense from last year that's back this year. The defense was actually pretty good, except for one play where Northern Iowa hit a slant over the middle, and the receiver actually broke a bunch of tackles to run for a long touchdown. Other than that, it wasn't too bad. They didn't turn the ball over a ton. They didn't have a ton of penalties in this game, but Iowa State, they weren't moving the ball. And it was like, you're this physically imposing, more athletic, more dominant team, and you should have run over this Northern Iowa team, and you didn't. So for a team that's supposed to be contending for one of those top spots, or at least trying to compete for one of those top spots, to come out week one and be an experienced team nonetheless and not have a great showing, that was surprising to me from Iowa State.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. Great call for you to bring that up. And, we talk about a lot of times how these teams week one schedule a lollipop, they believe. And I'm sure that's what Iowa State thought. And for them to be in a dogfight to get that win, yeah, it's got to be a little concerning if I'm a fan. And honestly, if I'm the coach there, I've got to be a little concerned. But if I'm the coach, I'm also using it saying, hey, guess what? You guys aren't exactly what you thought you were right now. We've got a lot of work to do, and we've got to get back to it right now this week to prepare for our next opponent. And I guarantee you that's exactly what the coaching staff is doing. So let's see what they do in week 2. But if they come out with another dud in week 2, then you've got a lot of concerns there in Iowa State, and they'll be dropping down the rankings pretty quick. But let's move on to our final topic of tonight, and that's Luka. We always love Luka on this show. Luka Doncic, the young Slovenian superstar that plays for the Dallas Mavericks. He's throwing around his superstar weight this time, and his I guess, friends over at 2K helping him do it, where he went back and rebuilt his childhood courts in Slovenia with the help of the 2K organization. And we all know he's now the cover boy for NBA 2K right now in the game of 2022. So I think this is a great play, not only by 2K, but also for Luka to be giving back as well.
Yeah, no question. We've talked a lot over the last couple of months of how well he played in the Olympics. How important it was to him to lead Slovenia into the, the medal rounds and to get as far as they did, and how well he played and how much pride he had in playing for his home country of Slovenia. This is sort of another, showing of how he takes pride in where he came from. And, he's partnering up, like you mentioned, with 2K. He's on the cover of 2K22. And it's just smart of 2K, on top of the fact that Luka probably wanted to help out his hometown. 2K's capitalizing on his success in the Olympics, his hometown, his home country, loving him right now, even though they probably did before too. But now he's on the cover. This is sort of a promotional thing that 2K can do. But, they are also giving back. I mean, they renovated these courts over in Slovenia, and hopefully this helps grow the sport of basketball in Slovenia. It's picked up a lot, I know, in the past few decades. But, now that you have a guy like Luka Doncic, who could someday and probably will be the MVP of the NBA at some point, now you have a court where supposedly it's got a logo that has like an LD and then a number 77. And, it's like the Luka court now. I remember in Boston, back when Rajon Rondo was still with the Celtics, I think he did something either with Reebok or it might have been Gatorade or Powerade or one of those companies, where they renovated some courts in Roxbury, and there was 1 million kids there because they just wanted to see Rajon Rondo, and they saw Rajon Rondo on the court that they hang out in every day, the playground that they hang out in every day, that they're there all summer long. And I'm sure there's kids in Slovenia that play on those courts all the time. And then to see Luka Doncic there renovating the court and hanging out there, that's going to have, look at those kids in the background. I mean, that's going to have, kids from all over Slovenia heading over there, checking that out. So this is really cool for Luka to do. Clearly, he's an ambassador of the game of basketball. I think that's when we see these types of things, we see players become ambassadors of the game of basketball. This is just great to see.
Yeah, we talked about how he's going to be the cover boy of the 2K game, and they picked, I think, a rightful guy, and rightfully earned at this point with his play not only in the NBA but in the Olympics as well and on the global stage. But he's a global superstar right now, so if you're picking a guy to be able to sell games all around the world, this is the guy to do it. I mean, not only do the American fans love him, but obviously everybody in Europe loves him, and all around the world. He's really one of the best players right now in the NBA. And he has a great personality, man. And I love seeing his interviews. I love seeing the way this young man carries himself. He's a great guy to have as a cover boy, honestly. And I think even the NBA is seeing that more now, that they want to use him even more now as a poster boy for the NBA. And like you said, an ambassador for the game, to be able to spread this game even more globally than it already is. And we know it's blown up globally over the last 2 decades, but it's still got more growth that it can have as far as the NBA is concerned. Still a lot more growth, and I think Luka Doncic is one of the guys that's going to help it grow globally. But this is great to see him give back to his local community and, to rebuild the court that he prepared himself on and got himself ready to make this NBA plunge to. And even, like I said before that, to be the MVP of the Euro League, which we've talked about that being an amazing feat when he was a teenager. So you bring this up, man, him giving back to his home country, to his local neighborhood, and now you might potentially have the next young Luka Doncic coming up on that court, preparing himself for his leap into the global market of basketball and into the NBA. So I think this is a great story all around, feel-good story for the NBA, for 2K, for Luka Doncic. And I love it. I think it's amazing. And I think the courts look amazing, too. I think they did a great job designing those courts. They look like they're going to last a good 2 decades. And if not, maybe they'll go there and keep them up. And I'm sure Luka will be one of those guys that wants to keep those courts up and going. But right now, they just look amazing. And I think they're ready to run. And then, look, you got a young Luka Doncic fan out there with his basketball. He's ready to go and ready to be that next generation of the international global superstar that's trying to step on the game. But yeah, I love this story. I think it's great. And I do think it's great marketing by 2K as well.
Yeah, no question. And yeah, you're right. Those courts do look awesome. I guess they put in new lighting and new stands too, so they'll probably have tournaments and things like that there. So nothing but good things out of Slovenia done there by Luka Doncic and 2K. Good stuff from them. Folks, that's going to do it for our show this week. Again, if you want to subscribe to Comeback Sports, make sure you're obviously watching us probably on YouTube right now. So make sure you go to the Comeback Sports YouTube page. You subscribe to that channel. All the different videos and content from this show is going to be filtered to your subscription. It makes it much easier to watch a lot of our stuff. So make sure you subscribe. You're helping us out. You're helping yourself out as well. Again, we've got our Twitter handles at the bottom of the screen right here. So when we tweet stuff out with updates on what shows, topics we're going to be talking about, and links to all the shows, you can follow us there as well. And again, while we're live on the air, you can certainly give us a call. Our phone number was up there earlier, and anytime you tune into us, you'll see the phone number there. You can call into the show and ask us a question. Brendan, any final thoughts before we sign off?
One more. It's Monza week here in F1. So we got, the end of the triple header here in F1. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the mecca of speed take form here at Monza. And I'm predicting a big bounce back from Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be Verstappen and Hamilton duking it out towards the end, as long as there's no crashes involved there. So those two guys still flip-flopping in the standings throughout the rest of the year. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch over the weekend. Folks, thanks again for joining us here on Comeback Sports. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.